It was an incredibly sad day for Michael as he attended the funeral of his beloved wife, Jessica, who had recently passed away. Honoring her final wish, he brought her cherished horse to the funeral. But then something unexpected happened. The horse began repeatedly stepping on the coffin, behaving in a way Michael had never seen before. Things quickly escalated as they struggled to control the horse, which became so frantic that it eventually broke the lid of the coffin. What they heard next left everyone in shock. The family desperately tried to pull the horse away, bewildered by its reaction. Up until that moment, the funeral had gone smoothly, but now it seemed completely disrupted, or was it? Just as the horse started to calm down, the silence was broken again, this time by a faint crying sound. Michael looked around, but everyone else seemed just as puzzled. Then he realized the sound was coming from inside the broken coffin. With a surge of panic, Michael jumped onto the coffin and removed the broken piece. What he discovered underneath was beyond belief. What was inside the coffin? Why did Jessica's horse react this way? And could everything the family thought they knew about her mysterious passing be wrong? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Jessica had been found unconscious in the stable next to her horse. She was found by one of the employees, who immediately for help. Police and ambulance personnel were quickly on the scene, but they were sadly still too late. Jessica was pronounced dead on the scene, according to the officer that came to inform Michael. She had been transported to a morgue where he was going to determine the cause of death. If Michael still wanted to see his wife as he remembered her, he would have to make it there before the investigation started. But Michael did not have much time to grieve or to wait for the result of the autopsy. He needed to start making arrangements for the funeral and call all of Jessica's loved ones to deliver the gut-wrenching news. All the responses he got to his calls would stay with him for a long time, but one stood out in particular. The response came from Jessica's best friend, with whom she often went horse riding. She was also very much distraught by the news, even though she had heard about it already, but also just happened to know Jessica's last wish. Michael was shocked by what she would reveal. Apparently, Jessica had told her many times that if she would ever come to pass away, she would want her horse Nikolai to be at the funeral. It was like she had predicted that it might happen soon. Michael wasn't sure if it was even allowed, but he had to make this happen. But Michael would definitely take it into account when making arrangements for the funeral. If there was even a chance that his now late wife would have wanted it, he was going to make it happen. There had to be a good reason for it. For the next couple of days, Michael was doing his very best to make preparations for the funeral at the held of Jessica's parents, but in the back of their head, they were still very much thinking about the possible cause of death. Was there any foul play involved? Getting the horse to attend the funeral was actually surprisingly easy. There just had to be somebody there who was trained to control the animal, and Jessica's best friend fit that bill. She had cared for Nikolai when Jessica could not be there. The horse felt very comfortable with her, maybe a little too comfortable. She would transport the horse on her trailer on the day of the funeral and have it there before the other guests arrived for the burial. Nobody objected to the horse being there. It should be a beautiful moment, but would eventually cause a lot of chaos. He had called the number of the person in charge of this multiple times already, but got told again and again that it was complicated and he had to be patient. "What do you mean complicated?" Michael screamed over the phone, but he got no real response. They had definitely found something. He did already place Jessica in her coffin, which was transported to her last resting place, as he now only needed to look at the samples he had collected. The test results would only come after the burial, and Michael had no patience. He had to get answers, but Michael was not satisfied with this at all, and decided that he wanted to file a complaint about the time it was taking. He would get a response later that day, but it would turn his whole world upside down. But first, the funeral had to happen. For now, his focus needed to be on the funeral. He wanted to give Jessica a worthy goodbye more than anything, and this would be done with a closed casket. This was a request from the man who did the autopsy, but it turned out the horse would have different plans. A lot of people talked at the funeral, and everybody had beautiful things to say about Jessica. Nobody was ready to say goodbye yet, but they knew they had no choice. This had come way too early. Nikolai was not present at the indoor ceremony, but things would soon change. This first part of the funeral went over normally, but things started getting strange when the proceedings were taken outside, where Nikolai was calmly waiting for his late owner to arrive. Only when the casket left the building, things started happening. The casket did not have to travel a long distance to get to Jessica's dad's final resting place. The group could actually already see the horse when they walked out of the building, and thus the horse could see them as well. And it reacted almost immediately. While it had been perfectly calm up until that point, the moment his eyes had sight on the casket that Jessica was in, he started becoming difficult. Eventually, he asked Jessica's friend and some other guests to take the horse further away from the burial site in the hopes it would calm him down a bit. And this seemed to help, but only for a little bit, as when the final speech started, the horse could not be held back anymore. It just started swinging its head wildly until Jessica's friend could simply not hold it anymore. The animal broke free and started charging at the casket. Other guests could not get out of the way fast enough and made a path for the animal. Only Michael had half a mind to stand in the way of the horse and protect his late wife. But his brother pulled him out of the way just in time. Now nobody was stopping the horse anymore as he started prancing next to the casket. To the horror of everybody there, the horse started stomping with his hoofs on the casket as Harfing would. And after only a few stomps from the horse, they could already hear the cracking of the wood, which got louder and more widespread with every impact. It was only a matter of time, and soon enough Michael saw one of the hoofs disappear into the broken casket. Michael had his eyes closed when it happened. This was probably the worst case scenario, but at least the horse seemed to get a bit calmer now. It had stopped stomping at least, but it was still thrashing around. They needed to get the animal away from the grave, and luckily they managed to grab the leash again with a lot of effort. They managed to pull the horse away from the casket, and the further he got away from it, the calmer he got, till a point where he seemed like nothing had happened. They tied the animal to a tree and went back to the service, still a bit shocked by what had just happened. The whole gathering of people was deadly silent. Nobody knew what to say or how to react. What had they just been witness to? The silence was only broken by a soft whimpering that slowly turned into crying, but there was something odd with it. None of the guests were tearing up from as far as he could see, but the sound of crying was still there, soft but unmistakable. Where the hell was it then coming from? And then Michael's eyes landed on the broken casket. He slowly took a couple of steps toward the casket, and the crying got indeed louder. There seemed to be no doubt anymore that it was actually coming from the wooden final resting place of Jessica. But how was that even possible? In an act of pure desperation, Michael climbed on the casket and started to remove some of the broken wooden pieces from it. The guests gasped when they saw what he was doing, but nobody was stopping him. They too had heard where the crying was coming from. When Michael pulled the final big piece of wood from the casket, he was completely shocked by what he saw. A female voice, shaky and nervously, answered from out of the casket, "I'm sorry, Michael." Nearly everybody there recognized the voice immediately, and when moments later their suspicions were confirmed when a female slowly got out of the casket. Jessica was alive. But how? There was nobody that could make sense of what was happening there except for Jessica. And as it would turn out, the funeral director might have something to say about the situation as well. As it would turn out, Jessica's whole story about dying at the stables had been made up. She had hatched a plan to fake her own death. And for a good payday, the funeral director and the mortician were in on it. They had wanted to make things look as real as possible. That is why Michael got to see her at the morgue, where she pretended to be dead, and why she actually took place in the casket, just in case anybody demanded to see her. She was even wearing makeup to look like she had been dead for a while. She had wanted her horse here so that when the funeral was over, she could get out of the casket before it got buried hours later and ride of Pias with no plans other than to just live in the moment and see where it would take her, as you can expect. The marriage between Michael and Jessica was quickly divorced. Nobody wanted anything to do with her anymore, and she was fine with that. It had not been the way she had wanted, but she had still gotten out of her life. Michael or any of her friends and family had not heard from her since.